My name is Hazel Mitchell, and at 34, I built a successful career as a financial consultant in San Francisco. Meanwhile, my family's Sunrise Valley Vineyard in Sonoma County has been my brother Ethan's playground for years. He's 29, the golden child, and somehow my parents thought he was the perfect choice to run a multi-million-dollar business. Last month, I received a frantic call asking for $100,000 to save the vineyard from bankruptcy. If you're watching this from anywhere with family drama, drop a like and subscribe. Let's get into how I went from family ATM to finally standing my ground. Sunrise Valley Vineyard wasn't just a business, it was our heritage. My grandparents, Joseph and Eleanor Mitchell, purchased the initial 40 acres in 1972, back when Sonoma wasn't the upscale wine destination it is today. They started with nothing but a weathered barn, a few rusty farm tools, and an unwavering belief in the land's potential. Grandpa Joe, a former Navy man with calloused hands and infinite patience, planted those first Cabernet vines himself, row by methodical row. Growing up on a vineyard shaped every aspect of my childhood. While other kids had summer vacations at theme parks, I had harvest seasons that taught me the meaning of hard work. By age 10, I could distinguish between grape varieties by sight and knew exactly when each type needed to be picked. I'd wake before dawn during harvest, helping the workers fill collection bins until my small arms ached. The vineyard soil was literally under my fingernails and embedded in my understanding of what it meant to build something meaningful. Our family home sat on a gentle slope overlooking the vineyards, a craftsman-style house with wide porches where we'd shell peas in summer and watch storm clouds gather in winter. My parents, Thomas and Martha Mitchell, were respected figures in the local wine community. Dad handled production while Mom managed the business side. They worked in perfect tandem, their partnership as carefully cultivated as their vines. Then Ethan came along when I was 5, and everything shifted. From the moment he could toddle through the vineyard rows, my parents treated him differently. Where I was expected to earn praise through hard work, Ethan received it freely for simply existing. His finger paintings earned prominent display in the tasting room while my perfect report cards barely warranted a nod. Dad would ruffle his hair affectionately, calling him the future of Mitchell wines, while I stood by with dirt-stained hands from actual vineyard work. One memory stands out with particular clarity. When I was 16, I'd spent months researching sustainable farming practices and presented my parents with a detailed proposal for organic certification. They glanced at my carefully compiled binder and said they'd think about it. 2 weeks later, 14-year-old Ethan suggested we should go organic because it's trendy, and suddenly my parents were calling organic certification consultants. Despite the constant favoritism, I excelled academically. I applied for scholarships behind my parents' backs and earned a full ride to UC Berkeley's business program. When I announced my acceptance at dinner, Mom's first response was, "But who will help during harvest?" Dad quickly added that the vineyard would always be there if this college experiment didn't work out. Meanwhile, Ethan was praised for making the junior varsity baseball team, his mediocre grades forgiven because he's just not academic like Hazel. College was my first taste of true independence. I thrived in the competitive business program, taking extra courses in financial management and marketing. Summers weren't spent at the vineyard anymore but at prestigious internships I'd secured through relentless networking. I graduated with honors in the top 5% of my class, with 3 job offers before I even received my diploma. My graduation ceremony was attended by only my grandmother. My parents and Ethan had a wine industry event they couldn't possibly miss. While I was building my career in San Francisco, climbing from entry-level analyst to senior consultant at Bradford Financial Advisors, Ethan was following a very different path. He barely scraped through a community college program, taking 6 years to earn an associate degree in general studies. His college years were peppered with parties, a DUI that my parents quietly handled, and frequent calls home for extra money. Yet somehow, in my parents' eyes, his free spirit was charming rather than concerning. The turning point came in 2019. Dad was approaching 65 and considering stepping back from day-to-day operations. I'd been dropping hints about my interest in the business side of the vineyard, even taking specialized courses in vineyard management and wine marketing. With my financial background and industry knowledge, I thought I'd be the natural choice to step in. I still remember the family dinner when they announced their succession plan. Mom had prepared all my childhood favorites: herb-roasted chicken, homemade sourdough, and apple crisp with vanilla ice cream. The table was set with the good china. I thought they were finally going to acknowledge my accomplishments and potential contribution to the family business. Instead, they proudly announced that Ethan would be taking over as general manager of Sunrise Valley. At 26, with zero business experience and a spotty work history at the Vineyard at best, my brother was being handed the reins to a multi-million-dollar operation that had been our family's livelihood for 3 generations. "But I have an actual business degree," I'd argued, my voice tight with disbelief. "I've been working in financial management for years." "That's exactly it, Hazel," Mom had replied gently, as if explaining something to a child. "You're established in your career. Ethan needs this opportunity to find his path. Besides, he has a natural charm with the customers." Dad had nodded sagely. "The wine business isn't just about numbers, Hazel. It's about passion and connecting with people. Ethan has that special touch." I'd offered a compromise. I could handle the financial side while Ethan managed customer relations. My offer was politely but firmly declined. "Too many cooks," Dad had said with a dismissive wave. "Ethan needs the space to make this his own." So I returned to my life in San Francisco, to my modern apartment in Pacific Heights with its bay windows and distant view of the Golden Gate Bridge. I doubled down on my career, earning promotions and building a healthy investment portfolio. Each time I visited home, I swallowed my concerns about the changes I was seeing at the Vineyard. It wasn't my place to criticize, I told myself. After all, they'd made it clear that this was Ethan's domain now. But sometimes, standing alone in the Vineyard at sunset, running my fingers over the gnarled vines my grandfather had planted, I couldn't help but feel that I was being kept from my rightful inheritance, not just the land, but the legacy of hard work and careful stewardship that had built Sunrise Valley into something special. The changes at Sunrise Valley began almost immediately after Ethan took control in late 2019. His first major decision was to purchase a fleet of new equipment: tractors, stainless steel fermentation tanks, and a state-of-the-art bottling line, despite the fact that our existing equipment was perfectly functional. The price tag? Nearly $300,000, financed through a high-interest loan that he assured our parents would pay for itself with increased efficiency. By spring 2020, the old tasting room was being vetted for a complete renovation. Ethan had hired an expensive San Francisco design firm to create what he called a modern wine experience: all sleek lines, minimalist decor, and custom furniture. The original rustic charm that visitors had loved for decades was discarded in favor of what looked like an upscale airport lounge. The initial budget of $75,000 quickly ballooned to over $200,000. "It's an investment in our brand image," Ethan explained during a rare family dinner I attended. "People expect luxury when they're paying premium prices for wine." I'd bitten my tongue, knowing my concerns wouldn't be welcomed. But I couldn't help noticing how my father's forehead creased with worry when he thought no one was looking. Then came the staffing changes. Marcus Thompson, our Vineyard manager for 20 years, was replaced by Ethan's college roommate Kevin, whose only agricultural experience was growing marijuana in his closet during sophomore year. Our skilled tasting room staff, many of whom had been with us for years and had deep knowledge of our wines, were gradually replaced by Ethan's friends, attractive young people who could barely distinguish Chardonnay from Sauvignon Blanc but looked good in the branded polo shirts Ethan had custom-made. "We need fresh energy," he'd explained when I questioned these decisions during one of my increasingly infrequent visits. Mom and Dad were stuck in the old ways. My parents, to my frustration, seemed unwilling or unable to intervene. "He's finding his footing," Mom would say. "We need to give him space to make his own mistakes." Dad would just shake his head and change the subject to my work in San Francisco, as if relieved to talk about something else. Then the pandemic hit, and the wine industry faced unprecedented challenges. Tasting rooms closed, distribution channels were disrupted, and wineries across California struggled to adapt. It was a time that called for careful financial management and creative problem solving. Instead, Ethan doubled down on risky investments. While other vineyards were cutting costs and focusing on direct-to-consumer shipping, Sunrise Valley launched an expensive rebranding campaign. New labels, new website, new marketing materials, all with premium price tags attached. He hired a social media agency to create content that seemed more focused on showcasing his lifestyle as a young vineyard owner than promoting our actual wines. In August 2020, during a quick visit to help with early harvest preparations, I discovered a stack of past due notices on the office desk. Equipment vendors, bottle suppliers, and even our loyal grape pickers were waiting on payments. When I tried to bring this up with my father, he brushed it off. "It's just cash flow issues because of COVID," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Every business is struggling right now. Ethan has a plan." That same evening, I overheard my parents arguing in the kitchen, something rare in their usually harmonious relationship. "We can't keep transferring money from our retirement account," Mom was saying, her voice tense with worry. "At this rate, there won't be anything left. What choice do we have?" Dad replied, sounding defeated. "We can't let the business fail. He just needs more time to turn things around." I should have intervened then. I should have demanded to see the books and offered my professional expertise. But years of having my input dismissed had conditioned me to stay silent. I returned to San Francisco the next day with a growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. The holiday season of 2020 brought more warning signs. The traditional employee holiday bonus was canceled. The annual Christmas party for local distributors and restaurant owners, a crucial networking event, was scaled back to almost nothing. Yet Ethan somehow found the budget for a personal trip to Aspen in January, posting Instagram photos of himself in designer ski gear with the caption "working hard or hardly working?" During my Easter visit in 2021, I finally attempted a direct conversation with Ethan about the vineyard's finances. We were walking among the new spring growth in the Cabernet section, the vines just beginning to bud. "I've noticed some concerning signs," I said carefully. "If you want, I could take a look at the books, maybe offer some suggestions on cash flow management." Ethan's normally cheerful face darkened. "I don't need my big sister micromanaging me," he snapped. "Just because you wear fancy suits and work in a high-rise doesn't mean you understand what we're doing here. Wine is different from whatever spreadsheet you're used to." "Business principles still apply," I countered. "Cash flow, debt management, operational efficiency." "God, you're so boring," he interrupted. "This is why Mom and Dad gave me the vineyard. I have vision. You just have calculations." He walked away, ending the conversation before it could really begin. That summer, Sunrise Valley skipped the annual industry wine competition, an event we'd participated in for 20 years, often winning medals that boosted our reputation and sales. When I asked why, Mom vaguely mentioned budget constraints. Yet a month later, Ethan unveiled a branded Jeep Wrangler wrapped in Sunrise Valley's logo and colors, a mobile marketing tool that he seemed to use primarily for weekend trips to Lake Tahoe with his friends. Throughout 2021 and into 2022, I watched from the sidelines as our family legacy slid further into trouble. Production quality began to suffer as experienced staff left and maintenance was deferred. Reviews on wine apps and tourism websites mentioned inconsistent quality and poor service. Distribution contracts that had been in place for years were lost to competitors. Each time I tried to offer help, I was rebuffed. "You have your life in the city," my parents would say. "Let Ethan handle this. He just needs time." So I retreated into my own life, focusing on my career and building my savings. I dated occasionally, though nothing serious developed, perhaps because I carried too much unresolved family baggage. I traveled, joined a hiking group, and made a comfortable life for myself. But the vineyard was never far from my thoughts. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in wine shops in San Francisco, looking at bottles from other Sonoma vineyards, wondering how Sunrise Valley was really doing beneath the surface of my family's reassurances. In retrospect, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Deep down, I knew it was just a matter of time before the house of cards Ethan had built would collapse. I just didn't expect to be asked to prevent the fall. The call came on a Tuesday evening in September 2022. I was just settling in after a long day of client meetings, Italian takeout on the coffee table and a glass of Pinot Noir in hand, not from our vineyard, a fact that occasionally triggered a pang of guilt. When my phone lit up with Mom's cell, I almost let it go to voicemail. Our conversations had become increasingly strained, filled with careful omissions and surface-level pleasantries. But some daughterly instinct made me answer. Hazel? My mother's voice was thick with tears. We need your help. Something in her tone made me set down my wine glass immediately. What's wrong? Is someone hurt? It's the vineyard. A shaky inhale. We're going to lose everything. Over the next 20 minutes, the situation unfolded in fragments between my mother's sobs and my father occasionally taking the phone to fill in details. Sunrise Valley Vineyard was $420,000 in debt. They hadn't made mortgage payments in 3 months. Equipment loans were in default. The upcoming harvest might not happen because they couldn't pay the workers. The bank had given them 30 days' notice before foreclosure proceedings would begin. Where is Ethan? I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. Why isn't he on this call? A heavy silence followed. He's taking some time to process, my father finally said. This has been hard on him. I closed my eyes, picturing my brother processing at some bar or friend's place while my parents faced financial ruin. Let me understand correctly. The vineyard is about to be foreclosed on, and Ethan, who's been running it into the ground, isn't even part of this conversation? Don't be so hard on him, Hazel, my mother interjected. He tried his best. The economy, the pandemic, the changing wine market. Mom, I interrupted, plenty of vineyards weathered those challenges without ending up in catastrophic debt. Another silence. I could hear them exchanging whispers. Finally, my father spoke. Hazel, we need your help. We wouldn't ask if there were any other option. What kind of help? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A loan, he said. Just until we get back on our feet. $100,000 would give us enough breathing room to make arrangements with the bank and other creditors. The amount hit me like a physical blow. $100,000 represented years of careful saving, money I'd been putting aside for my own future, perhaps a down payment on a place of my own, or seed capital if I ever decided to start my own consulting firm. It was my safety net, my independence. That's a significant amount, I said carefully. Have you explored other options? Restructuring the debt? Bringing in investors? Selling some of the non-essential assets? We've tried everything, my mother said. The banks won't extend any more credit. We can't find investors willing to take on the current debt load. And if we start selling equipment, we won't be able to operate. My mind was racing, professional training battling with emotional ties. I'll need to see the books. All of them. Full transparency about exactly how bad things are before I can consider this. I could sense their hesitation through the phone. There are some things. My father began. Some decisions that might look bad on paper but made sense at the time. Either I see everything or I can't help, I stated firmly. I'm not writing a blank check based on emotions. After some more back and forth, they reluctantly agreed. My father promised to email me financial statements that night, though he cautioned they might not be completely up to date. I scheduled a flight to Sonoma for that Friday, 3 days away, giving them time to gather documents and giving myself time to prepare emotionally for what I might find. After hanging up, I sat motionless on my couch, dinner forgotten. My professional instincts were screaming that this was a bad investment, throwing good money after bad. But these weren't clients, they were my family. The vineyard wasn't just a business, it was where I grew up, where my grandparents were buried in the small family plot near the oldest vines. That night, I barely slept. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction, Hadn't I warned them about Ethan's irresponsibility? Hadn't I offered my help years ago, only to be dismissed? Another part felt genuine fear for my parents, now in their late 60s, facing the loss of everything they'd worked for. By morning, I had formulated a plan. I would approach this as I would any other financial crisis management situation. I would assess the true extent of the damage, identify the root causes, and determine whether rehabilitation was even possible before committing any funds. I would be professional, objective, and unemotional. As the senior financial consultant at Bradford, I requested emergency personal leave, explaining only that a family business crisis required my attention. My boss, understanding the value of my consistent performance over the years, approved the time off without question. The financial documents began arriving in my inbox that afternoon, scattered, incomplete, and far worse than I had imagined. Basic accounting principles had been ignored. Expenses were categorized haphazardly. Some months of bank statements were missing entirely. But even this chaotic glimpse confirmed my fears. Sunrise Valley wasn't just struggling, it was in free fall. I spent the next 2 days preparing as if for a high-stakes client presentation. I created spreadsheets, identified key questions, and researched comparable vineyards' performance during the same time period to benchmark against. I even contacted an industry colleague who specialized in winery valuations, without revealing our identity, to get a sense of what Sunrise Valley might be worth if rehabilitation wasn't feasible. As my flight descended into Sonoma County Airport that Friday afternoon, I gazed out at the patchwork of vineyards below, their neat rows creating geometric patterns across the landscape. Somewhere among them was Sunrise Valley, the place that should have been partly mine, now teetering on the edge of destruction. I had arrived not just as a daughter, but as judge, jury, and potential savior. The weight of those roles settled heavily on my shoulders as I disembarked into the golden California sunshine. The drive from the airport to Sunrise Valley took me through familiar wine country landscapes that normally brought comfort. This time, each bend in the road only increased my anxiety. When I finally turned onto our private road, the Sunrise Valley Vineyard sign at the entrance, once proudly maintained, was now weathered and tilting slightly to one side, a fitting metaphor for the business itself. The tasting room parking lot, which should have been busy on a Friday afternoon in September, held only 3 cars. The building itself, with its expensive modern renovation, already showed signs of neglect. Planters with dead flowers flanked the entrance, and a large window had a visible crack running through one corner. My parents' house, set on the hill overlooking the vineyard, seemed smaller somehow, the paint fading and gutters sagging in places. I parked beside my mother's familiar Subaru and sat for a moment, gathering strength for what was to come. Mom opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a tight hug that felt both familiar and desperate. She had aged visibly since I'd last seen her at Easter, new lines around her eyes, her hair showing more gray than brown now. "You look well," she said, studying my face. "The city agrees with you." Dad appeared behind her, his usual confident posture replaced by a slight stoop. The skin around his eyes was puffy, as if he hadn't been sleeping. He embraced me wordlessly, his hand patting my back with the awkward affection he'd always shown. "Where's Ethan?" I asked as I followed them into the kitchen, still the heart of the house, though the copper pots that once hung gleaming from the ceiling rack were now tarnished with neglect. "He'll join us for dinner," Mom replied, avoiding my eyes. "He's finishing up some work at the production facility." The evasiveness in her tone told me everything I needed to know. My brother was avoiding this confrontation as long as possible. "I need to see the vineyard first," I said firmly. "Before we talk numbers or solutions." Dad nodded, seeming almost relieved to delay the financial discussion. "I'll walk with you." As we toured the property, the extent of the decline became painfully clear. Sections of vines showed signs of fungal infection that had clearly been left untreated. The equipment barn housed the shiny new tractors Ethan had purchased, but they sat alongside critical machinery in obvious disrepair. The production facility's roof leaked in one corner, with buckets catching drips perilously close to electrical equipment. "How long has that roof been leaking?" I asked, pointing. Dad sighed. Since last winter. Ethan kept saying he had a roofing guy coming, but... He trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging between us. The barrel room, where wine typically aged in carefully monitored conditions, was only half full. We had to sell some of last year's production in bulk to another vineyard, Dad explained when I asked. Quick cash flow, but at a fraction of what we'd have gotten by aging and bottling it ourselves. Each new revelation was another blow. This wasn't just financial mismanagement, it was the systematic dismantling of generations of work. The irrigation system in the East Field has been down for 2 months, Dad continued, his voice flat. We've been hand-watering the most vulnerable vines, but we've likely lost at least 20% of that section. By the time we returned to the house, my professional detachment was crumbling. This wasn't just a business in trouble, it was my heritage being destroyed through neglect and incompetence. Dinner was a tense affair. Mom had prepared pot roast, a childhood favorite that now felt like an obvious attempt to soften me up. Ethan arrived 30 minutes late, reeking of expensive cologne and barely making eye contact as he mumbled a greeting. So, the prodigal daughter returns to save the day, he said after his second glass of wine, notably not from our vineyard but an expensive Napa Valley label. Come to lecture us all on our failures? I'm here because I was asked to help, I replied evenly. Which starts with understanding exactly what's happened. What's happened, Ethan snapped, is that running a vineyard in today's market is impossible. Corporate wineries are squeezing out family operations like ours. COVID destroyed our tasting room traffic. Distribution channels are locked up by the big players. Many family vineyards are surviving, I countered. Some are even thriving by adapting to market conditions. Easy for you to say from your cushy office job, he retorted. You have no idea what it's been like in the trenches. Mom interjected with forced brightness, let's not argue. Hazel is here to help, Ethan. We should be grateful. The rest of dinner continued in this vein, surface pleasantries punctuated by Ethan's defensive jabs and my parents' attempts to mediate. We carefully avoided any substantive discussion of finances, though it loomed over every exchange like a storm cloud. After dinner, while Mom cleared the table and Dad took Ethan aside for what appeared to be a stern conversation judging by their body language, I slipped into the home office. The family's financial documents had traditionally been kept here, in the roll-top desk that had belonged to my grandfather. The desk drawers were a chaotic mess of papers, unpaid bills mixed with equipment warranties and random correspondence. I began sorting through them methodically, creating piles based on urgency and category. What emerged was a picture even more dire than I'd anticipated. Their property insurance was 3 months overdue, with a cancellation notice dated the previous week. The property tax bill carried a significant penalty for late payment. Equipment loans showed missed payments and escalating interest. Payroll taxes for the vineyard workers hadn't been submitted for the last quarter, risking significant IRS penalties. At around 11 that night, after my parents had gone to bed and Ethan had disappeared to parts unknown, I settled at the dining room table with my laptop and the most critical documents, determined to get a comprehensive overview before tomorrow's inevitable confrontation. Hours of analysis confirmed my worst fears. Sunrise Valley wasn't just in debt, it was in a death spiral. The combination of unnecessary expenditures, declining production quality, mismanaged resources, and mounting interest payments had created a situation that my $100,000 would barely dent. Just after 2 a.m., as I was about to close my laptop, I discovered a folder buried deep in the filing cabinet labeled Personal Expenses. Curiosity drove me to open it, despite my exhaustion. What I found made my blood run cold. Bank statements showed regular transfers from the vineyard's business account to Ethan's personal account, labeled as consulting fees but without any corresponding invoices or work products. Credit card statements revealed purchases at luxury retailers, high-end restaurants, and even a week-long stay at a resort in Hawaii, all charged to the vineyard's business account. But the most damning document was a deed of trust dated 6 months earlier. My parents had taken out a second mortgage on their home, their personal residence, not the business property, for $150,000. A handwritten note in my mother's writing indicated that $75,000 had gone to ease investment opportunity and the rest to operational expenses. I sat back, stunned. The investment opportunity almost certainly referred to Ethan's brief obsession with cryptocurrency that he'd mentioned during holiday dinner last year. My parents had mortgaged their home to fund my brother's crypto speculation while the vineyard was already failing. As I was processing this discovery, I heard movement in the hallway. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to anger when he saw the documents spread across the table. "Going through our private papers in the middle of the night?" he accused. "Real classy, Hazel." "These aren't private papers," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "These are business records for the vineyard I'm being asked to save. And frankly, what I'm seeing looks more like embezzlement than business management." His face flushed. "You have no right." "I have every right," I interrupted, holding up the credit card statement showing his Hawaii vacation. "This isn't your personal piggy bank, Ethan. This is our family's livelihood. Generations of work that you've nearly destroyed in 3 years." He stepped forward, looming over the table. "You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad chose me to run things. You can't stand that they trusted me instead of their precious overachieving daughter." "They chose wrong," I said flatly. "And deep down, you know it too. You were never qualified for this responsibility, and now everyone's paying the price." He stormed out without another word, the front door slamming moments later. I heard a car engine start and tires spin on gravel as he fled the confrontation. Alone again, I continued my analysis until dawn, the full picture becoming unavoidably clear. My brother had systematically looted our family business while my parents enabled him. The vineyard that should have supported them in retirement was now a liability that threatened to leave them homeless. And I was expected to sacrifice my financial security to perpetuate this dysfunction. As sunrise painted the hills golden outside the dining room window, I reached a painful conclusion. I couldn't save Sunrise Valley with just money. What this situation needed was a complete reset of management, expectations, and family dynamics. The question was whether my family could accept the hard truths and harder changes that would be necessary. Morning brought heavy fog rolling through the vineyard, shrouding the vines in a ghostly white blanket. It seemed fitting. The clear vision of what Sunrise Valley had once been was now obscured by the mist of financial disaster and family dysfunction. I hadn't slept at all, running various financial scenarios until my eyes burned. By 7 a.m., I had prepared a comprehensive assessment, complete with projections and options. None of them were particularly optimistic. My mother found me in the kitchen, making a pot of coffee strong enough to fuel my sleep-deprived brain. Her eyes widened at the sight of spreadsheets and documents covering every surface. "Have you been up all night?" she asked, pulling her robe tighter around herself. "We need to talk," I replied. "All of us." "Where's Dad?" "Still sleeping. He's been having trouble with his blood pressure lately. The doctor gave him medication." She lowered her voice. "The stress has been terrible for him." The implication was clear, I shouldn't upset him further. But coddling and avoidance had led us to this precipice. "Mom, we need full transparency today. I've seen enough to know that $100,000 won't fix this. Not even close." Her face crumpled slightly. "But you'll still help us, right? You've always been our responsible one." That phrase, "our responsible one," hit me like a slap. Not the cherished one, not the favorite, just the reliable backup plan when the golden child failed. "I need everyone in the office at 9, I said instead of answering directly. "Including Ethan." "He might not be back yet," she hedged. "Sometimes when he's upset, he stays with friends." "Then call him," I said firmly. "This isn't optional." To my surprise, everyone assembled in the Vineyard office as requested. Dad looked exhausted, the weight of failure visible in the slump of his shoulders. Mom hovered nervously, rearranging papers and straightening picture frames, her usual response to stress. Ethan slouched in a corner chair, hungover and resentful, wearing the same clothes from last night. I stood at the head of the table, feeling strangely calm despite the tension crackling in the room. Years of presenting difficult financial realities to clients had prepared me for this moment. I've spent the night reviewing Sunrise Valley's financial situation, I began. I'll be direct, it's worse than you've admitted to me. The Vineyard isn't just struggling, it's functionally insolvent. Dad winced at the word. Mom's hands trembled as she clasped them in her lap. I walked them through my findings methodically, using the whiteboard to illustrate the key points. The total debt load of $420,000. The depleted inventory. The deferred maintenance creating additional future liabilities. The pending legal issues with unpaid vendors and tax authorities. At the current rate, even with the $100,000 you've asked me for, the Vineyard would likely fail within 6 months, I concluded. It would be throwing good money after bad. So you're refusing to help, Ethan said bitterly. Big surprise. I didn't say that, I replied evenly. I said 100,000 wouldn't solve the problem as things stand now. Dad leaned forward. What would it take, then? 200,000? We could sell the lake cottage. It's not just about money, I explained. It's about fundamental management problems. I turned to the next page of my presentation, which detailed the operational issues I'd identified: overstaffing in some areas, critical understaffing in others, poor inventory management, non-existent quality control processes. Ethan shot to his feet. This is bullshit. You come back after years away and think you understand everything about running a vineyard from one day of snooping around? Ethan, please, Mom pleaded. Let her finish. I flipped to the next page, a detailed breakdown of the consulting fees and personal expenses charged to the business account. The room went silent. Would someone like to explain these? I asked quietly. Dad's face had gone ashen. Mom looked at the floor. Ethan's expression shifted rapidly from anger to something closer to panic. Business development, he finally muttered. Networking. Building relationships with potential distributors. $4,000 at Gucci is business development? I asked. A week-long stay at the Four Seasons Maui is networking? Please explain how these expenses benefit Sunrise Valley. When no one answered, I continued. And then there's this. I placed the second mortgage document on the table. $150,000 borrowed against your home. With $75,000 going to an investment opportunity that I can only assume was Ethan's cryptocurrency scheme he was bragging about at Christmas. Mom began to cry softly. Dad put his head in his hands. You had no right to go through our personal papers, Ethan hissed. When you ask me for $100,000 to save the business, I have every right to understand where previous funds went, I countered. This isn't personal, Ethan. This is business. The business you've been systematically draining. What followed was the most painful family argument of my life. Ethan shifted between defensive justifications and angry accusations. Mom tried desperately to mediate while Dad sat in stunned silence. Years of family dynamics, resentments, and unequal treatment surfaced like debris after a flood. The breaking point came when Ethan, backed into a corner by irrefutable evidence, lashed out, "At least I stayed. At least I cared enough to try. You just abandoned the family to chase your precious career. Where were you when Dad needed surgery 2 years ago? When we were fighting to keep things going during COVID? Where was I?" My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. I was building a career and financial security because I was never given the chance to be part of this vineyard's future. I was explicitly told I wasn't needed or wanted here. And now that you've driven it into the ground, suddenly I'm supposed to empty my savings to fix your mess? That's not fair, Hazel, Mom interjected. We never said you weren't wanted. You didn't have to say it. You showed it in every decision, every time Ethan's whims were indulged while my efforts were taken for granted. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. And the worst part is, I would have done anything for this vineyard. I loved it as much as any of you. But I was never given the chance. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "You're right," he said softly. "We failed you, Hazel. And we failed the vineyard too, by not seeing what was happening." Ethan stormed out, slamming the door so hard that a framed photo of my grandparents fell from the wall, the glass cracking across their smiling faces. I was shaking with emotion, years of pent-up feelings suddenly unleashed. Without another word, I walked out of the office and headed straight for the vineyard, needing space and air. The fog had lifted, revealing rows of vines stretching toward the horizon. I found myself in the oldest section, where Grandpa Joe had planted the first Cabernet vines 50 years ago. These gnarly old plants had weathered drought, frost, and pests, yet still produced small quantities of exceptional grapes. Their resilience had always inspired me. I sat on a large rock at the end of a row, the same rock where I'd eaten countless lunches as a child helping during harvest season. Memories washed over me, the sweet smell of ripe grapes in autumn sunshine, my grandfather teaching me how to test for sugar content, the satisfaction of seeing trucks laden with our harvest heading for the production facility. This land was in my blood. Despite the years away, despite the pain of rejection, I still felt connected to every vine, every handful of soil. Could I really walk away and let it all disappear? But another voice in my head, the voice of self-preservation and hard-won independence, argued back. Why sacrifice my financial security for people who had consistently chosen Ethan over me? Why enable more dysfunction? As the morning warmed around me, a clarity began to emerge. This wasn't an either/or decision. There was a third path, one that honored both my connection to Sunrise Valley and my need for respect and recognition. I returned to the house 2 hours later, my mind made up. Mom was alone in the kitchen, methodically kneading bread dough, her therapy in times of stress. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "Lying down. His blood pressure." She trailed off, then looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Are you leaving?" "Not yet," I replied. "I have a proposal. But I need everyone to hear it together. No more fragmented conversations or hidden agendas." "Ethan came back about an hour ago," she said. "He's in the guest house. He's very upset. He needs to be part of this discussion," I insisted. "This affects all of us." With reluctance, Mom called everyone together in the living room. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as I stood before my family, Dad in his armchair looking suddenly older than his years, Mom perched nervously on the sofa's edge, and Ethan standing by the window, arms crossed defensively. "I've made a decision," I began. "I'm willing to help save Sunrise Valley, but not with a loan. And not under the current management structure." I outlined my proposal clearly and concisely. I would invest $100,000, but as equity, not debt, giving me 51% ownership and decision-making authority. I would install a professional management team, with my parents serving as consultants but without financial control. Ethan would be removed from operations but offered a position in sales, where his people skills could be an asset without giving him access to financial accounts. "This isn't a negotiation," I concluded. "These are my terms. Take them or leave them." The silence that followed was profound. Ethan was the first to respond, his face contorted with rage. "This is a hostile takeover. You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you? Waiting for us to fail so you could swoop in and steal the vineyard." "If I wanted the vineyard to fail," I replied calmly, "I would just walk away right now. You're doing a fine job of destroying it without my help." He lunged forward, pointing his finger inches from my face. "You self-righteous bitch. You think you're so much better than everyone else with your fancy job and your perfect little life. You have no idea what it's been like trying to keep this place going while you've been playing big shot in San Francisco." "Ethan." Dad's sharp voice cut through his tirade. "That's enough. Go cool off." To my surprise, my brother actually listened, storming out of the house with a string of obscenities that made Mom wince. When the door slammed behind him, Dad sighed heavily. He's always had your grandfather's temper, he said, as if that excused everything. This isn't about temper, I said. It's about accountability. And it's about the future of Sunrise Valley. Mom was crying again, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. It feels like you're punishing us, Hazel. I'm trying to save the vineyard, I corrected her. Which means saving you and Dad from losing everything, including your home. But I won't throw my money away, and I won't enable more of the same behavior that got us here. Dad stood up slowly, his movements those of a much older man. Can we have some time to think about this? It's a lot to take in. You have 24 hours, I replied. I have a return flight booked for Sunday afternoon. I need your decision before I leave. I spent that night in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded posters and academic trophies, feeling both resolved and uncertain. Had I been too harsh? Too demanding? Was I using this crisis as revenge for years of favoritism? Around midnight, I called my best friend Laura, needing an outside perspective. You're doing the right thing, she assured me after I'd explained the situation. They're asking you for $100,000. You have every right to set terms. But they're family, I said, voicing my deepest worry. What if this destroys what's left of our relationship? Hazel, Laura said gently, they already damaged that relationship by treating you as the afterthought all these years. You're offering them a solution that could save everything they care about. If they can't see that, it's on them, not you. As I lay awake watching moonlight create patterns on my ceiling, I realized Laura was right. I was done being the family doormat. My proposal wasn't just about financial rescue, it was about redefining my place in the family and in the legacy of Sunrise Valley. Whatever they decided tomorrow, I would walk away with my dignity intact. Saturday morning dawned clear and unusually warm for September. I woke early after fitful sleep, my mind still churning with financial calculations and emotional complexities. The house was quiet as I made coffee and took it out to the front porch, watching the sunrise paint the vineyard in golden light, the same daily miracle that had given our family business its name decades ago. Around 9, I heard movement inside as my parents began their day. I stayed on the porch, giving them space while steeling myself for what was to come. By 10, Mom had called me in for breakfast, her attempt at normalcy both touching and slightly absurd given the circumstances. We ate in uncomfortable silence, the elephant in the room growing larger by the minute. Dad cleared his throat several times as if about to speak, then thought better of it. Mom refilled coffee cups that weren't empty and straightened place settings that didn't need arranging. Where's Ethan? I finally asked. He stayed in the guest house last night, Dad replied. I spoke with him earlier this morning. And? Dad exchanged a look with Mom. He's processing. But he'll be here for the meeting at noon. Good, I said, standing and gathering my dishes. Because we need to resolve this today. I spent the next 2 hours refining my proposal, creating a proper document with clear terms and a timeline for implementation. If they agreed, I wanted everything in writing, no more family handshake deals or vague understandings. At noon sharp, we gathered in the dining room. I had set up my laptop and a small portable printer, along with copies of key financial documents. My parents entered together, looking like they'd aged years overnight. Ethan arrived 5 minutes late, unshaven and red-eyed, but surprisingly subdued compared to yesterday's explosion. Before we start, Dad said, we want you to know that we've discussed your proposal, and we have some concerns. I nodded. I expected you might. But my terms are non-negotiable. Just hear us out, Mom pleaded. We appreciate your willingness to help, but surely there's a middle ground. What followed was their counterproposal. I would provide the $100,000 as a loan rather than equity investment. Ethan would remain in charge but would consult with me on major financial decisions. My parents would have ultimate authority to resolve any disagreements between us. There would be quarterly family meetings to review progress. It was, essentially, a plan to take my money while changing nothing fundamental about the broken system that had created this crisis. No, I said simply when they finished. That's not going to work. Why not? Mom asked. We're trying to meet you halfway. Because it doesn't address the root problems, I explained. Ethan has demonstrated that he cannot manage this business responsibly. The vineyard needs professional leadership, not family dynamics masquerading as a business structure. Ethan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet until now, finally spoke. So it's your way or nothing? Some sister you are. This isn't about being a sister or a daughter, I replied. It's about saving a failing business. If a client came to me with this situation, this is exactly the advice I'd give them. We're not clients. Mom exclaimed. We're family. Which is why I'm offering to help at all, I countered. Any objective financial advisor would tell you this business is beyond saving and should be liquidated immediately. Dad leaned forward, his expression pained. Hazel, you're asking us to give you control of something that's been in our family for generations. Something your grandfather built from nothing. Can't you understand how difficult that is for us? I understand completely, I said. But I'm not asking for control out of greed or power. I'm requiring it because it's the only way to save Sunrise Valley. And frankly, if Grandpa Joe were here, he'd be heartbroken to see what's happened to his legacy. The mention of my grandfather hit home. Dad's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw genuine shame cross Ethan's face. Let me be very clear, I continued, softening my tone slightly. I don't want to hurt anyone. I love this vineyard too. But love isn't enough to save it. We need expertise, discipline, and a complete reset of how business decisions are made. I opened my laptop and displayed the projections I'd created. Look at these numbers. If we implement my plan, Sunrise Valley could be cash flow positive within 18 months. In 3 years, we could be profitable again, maybe even begin to expand. But that only happens with professional management and strict financial controls. Mom was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. It feels like you're punishing us for choosing Ethan over you. Her words hit like a physical blow, both for their accuracy and their obliviousness. After all these years, she still didn't understand how deeply their favoritism had hurt me. This isn't punishment, I said quietly. This is reality. The reality is that Ethan has run this business into the ground while using it as his personal piggy bank. The reality is that you and Dad have enabled him every step of the way. And the reality is that I'm the only one with both the financial means and the business expertise to save Sunrise Valley. But I won't do it under conditions that guarantee failure. Ethan suddenly slammed his hand on the table, making us all jump. This is such bullshit. You've always been jealous of me. Always resented that Mom and Dad saw something special in me that you don't have. What exactly did they see, Ethan? I asked, my patience finally snapping. Your ability to spend money you didn't earn? Your talent for failing upward? Please, enlighten me about these special qualities that qualified you to destroy our family legacy. Enough! Dad shouted, surprising us all. He rarely raised his voice. This isn't helping anything. You're right, I agreed, taking a deep breath to calm myself. So let's focus on the decision at hand. My proposal stands as presented. Full control, professional management, and a path to recovery. Ethan removed from operations but offered a position in sales if he wants it. You and Mom as consultants with your institutional knowledge, but no financial authority. I stood up, gathering my papers. I need to clear my head. I'm going for a walk. When I come back, I need your answer, yes or no. No more counteroffers, no more emotional manipulation. Without waiting for a response, I left the house and headed for the vineyard again. The sun was high now, warming the ripening grapes that would soon be ready for harvest, if there was money to pay the workers to pick them. I walked the full perimeter of the property, touching vines, examining clusters, noting areas that needed attention. Despite everything, I still loved this place. It was in my blood, part of my identity even after years away. But love wasn't enough to overcome the damage that had been done, both to the business and to our family relationships. When I returned to the house an hour later, I found my parents alone in the living room. Ethan's car was gone from the driveway. "Where's Ethan?" I asked. "He left," Dad said, his voice flat. "Said he needed space to think." "Running away from problems again," I noted. "Typical." Mom shot me a reproachful look but didn't contradict me. "Have you made a decision?" I asked, remaining standing rather than joining them on the couch. Dad nodded slowly. "We have. We'll accept your terms." I blinked in surprise. I'd been preparing myself for rejection, for the painful process of walking away knowing I'd tried my best. "All of them? Including removing Ethan from management?" "Yes," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have a choice, do we?" "There's always a choice," I replied. "You could decline my offer and try to find another solution." Dad gave a humorless laugh. "What solution?" "The bank will foreclose in 3 weeks. We're behind on property taxes. Vendors are threatening lawsuits. Without your help, we lose everything." His candor was unexpected but welcome. At least we were finally dealing in reality rather than emotions and wishful thinking. "I'll have the papers drawn up," I said. "We'll need to act quickly to secure emergency financing for the harvest." As I turned to leave the room, Mom called after me. "Hazel? Do you think, can Sunrise Valley really be saved?" I paused in the doorway. "Yes, I do. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. And things will never go back to how they were before." "I think maybe that's for the best," Dad said quietly. "How we were before got us here." It was the first acknowledgement that the problem went deeper than financial mismanagement, that our family dynamics themselves had contributed to this crisis. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That evening, I worked late into the night preparing the necessary documentation, coordinating with my attorney in San Francisco via email to ensure everything was legally sound. I also began reaching out to industry contacts about potential management candidates who specialized in vineyard turnarounds. Just after midnight, as I was finalizing the ownership transfer documents, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Heavy footsteps on the porch told me Ethan had returned. I tensed, preparing for another confrontation. He appeared in the doorway of the dining room where I was working, looking disheveled and exhausted. For a moment, we just stared at each other in silence. "Mom texted me," he finally said. "Told me they accepted your terms." I nodded, waiting. "You must be happy," he continued, a bitter edge to his voice. "You finally won." "This isn't about winning, Ethan," I sighed. "It's about saving the vineyard. By taking it away from me." "By taking it away from failure," I corrected. "Look, I meant what I said about a position in sales. You have genuine talent there. You're good with people when you want to be. But running the business operations was never your strength." He leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking very young and vulnerable. "What am I supposed to do now?" "This was my whole life." "It still can be," I said, surprised by the compassion I felt despite everything. "Just in a different role. One that actually suits your skills." He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought I glimpsed a flicker of relief beneath the resentment in his eyes. Perhaps, deep down, he had known he was drowning in responsibilities he wasn't equipped to handle. "I need time to think," he finally said. "This is a lot." "Take the time you need," I replied. "But harvest is coming, and we need all hands on deck if we're going to save this season." He nodded once, then turned and headed upstairs without another word. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it wasn't outright rejection either. Like the vines after a hard frost, there was damage, but also the possibility of recovery. As I returned to my paperwork, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I was being seen and acknowledged by my family. It had taken a catastrophe to get here, but perhaps from these ashes, something healthier could grow, for the vineyard and for us. The transformation of Sunrise Valley Vineyard began with the harvest of 2022. With emergency funds secured through my investment, we were able to hire an experienced crew to bring in what turned out to be a surprisingly decent crop despite the neglect of the previous months. I extended my leave of absence from Bradford Financial Advisors to 3 months, temporarily relocating to a rental in town to oversee the initial transition. The first major decision was hiring Jason Winters, a respected vineyard consultant with a track record of turning around struggling operations. His assessment was brutally honest but ultimately hopeful. "The vines have good bones," he told us after his initial walkthrough. "The terroir is excellent. The brand still has some equity in the marketplace. This is salvageable, but it's going to take time, money, and a complete operational overhaul." With Jason's guidance, we implemented a triage approach, addressing the most critical issues first while developing a long-term strategic plan. The leaking roof in the production facility was repaired. Infected vines were treated or, when necessary, removed. Equipment was serviced and properly maintained, often for the first time in years. The financial situation was even more challenging than I'd initially realized. Once we had full access to all accounts and records, we discovered additional debts that Ethan had either hidden or forgotten about. Our total liability was closer to $500,000 rather than the $420,000 I'd been told. "Why didn't you tell me the full extent of the debt?" I asked my father when this came to light. He looked genuinely bewildered. "I honestly didn't know. Ethan handled all of that." It was a painful reminder of how completely my parents had abdicated responsibility, trusting Ethan blindly despite mounting evidence of his incompetence. Ethan himself remained a complex challenge. After initially disappearing for 2 weeks following the ownership transfer, he returned with an unexpected proposal of his own. "I want to try the sales position," he said during a tense meeting in what was now officially my office. "But I want a clear path to earning back some ownership stake if I perform well." It was the first sign that he might be capable of growth, of accepting accountability for his actions. We structured a performance-based agreement that would allow him to earn up to 15% ownership over 5 years if he met specific sales targets. It wasn't control, but it was a meaningful stake in the business he claimed to care about. The early months were brutal. We had to let go of several of Ethan's friends who were drawing salaries for poorly defined roles. We scaled back operations, focusing on our most profitable wine varieties rather than the scattershot approach Ethan had taken. We renegotiated payment terms with vendors, many of whom were initially reluctant to work with us given our recent history of late or missed payments. My parents struggled with their new roles as consultants rather than owners. Dad would often begin sentences with "this is how we've always done it," only to be shown data demonstrating why those methods were no longer effective. Mom had difficulty separating family dynamics from business decisions, still instinctively mediating between Ethan and me rather than focusing on what was best for Sunrise Valley. The hardest moment came 3 months into the turnaround, when we discovered that one of our signature wines from the previous vintage had serious quality issues. A batch of Cabernet Sauvignon that had been bottled under Ethan's supervision had developed flaws that made it unmarketable. "We need to recall it," Jason insisted during our weekly management meeting. "Every bottle on the market." "That will cost a fortune," Dad protested. "And the damage to our reputation." "The damage will be worse if customers drink flawed wine with our label on it," I pointed out. "This is non-negotiable." Ethan, to my surprise, spoke up in agreement. "Hazel's right. It's my mistake, and we need to own it." It was the first time he had acknowledged one of his failures directly, without excuses or deflection. A small step, but a significant one. The recall was expensive and embarrassing, but it also became an opportunity. We used it to communicate our commitment to quality, to explain the vineyard's new management, and to invite customers to visit and see the changes for themselves. It was painful honesty, but it was also effective marketing. As winter settled over the vineyard and the vines went dormant, the business itself was showing small signs of revival. Our direct-to-consumer sales were growing, partly due to Ethan's genuine talent for customer engagement when he applied himself. Our costs were under control for the first time in years. We had negotiated workable payment plans with our major creditors. We were still a long way from profitable, but we were no longer in free fall. It was enough progress that I felt comfortable returning to my job in San Francisco, though I continued to spend weekends at the Vineyard and manage the financial aspects remotely. By the one-year mark of my investment, Sunrise Valley had achieved a significant milestone. We were breaking even on monthly operations. We weren't yet making payments against the principal of our debt, but we weren't adding to it either. It was sustainable, if not yet thriving. The most unexpected development was in my family relationships. My parents, stripped of the ability to enable Ethan's poor decisions, gradually began to see both of us more clearly. They witnessed my business acumen in action and, for perhaps the first time, fully appreciated what I brought to the table. They also saw Ethan's strengths and weaknesses without the distorting lens of favoritism. "You were right," Dad told me one evening as we walked through the vineyard inspecting the new season's growth. "About everything. We should have listened to you years ago." "It's not about being right, Dad," I replied. "It's about doing what's best for Sunrise Valley. That's all I ever wanted." He nodded, his eyes on the distant hills. "Your grandfather would be proud of you. I should have told you that more often." It wasn't a complete healing of old wounds, but it was something authentic, an acknowledgement that had been too long in coming. Ethan's journey was more complicated. There were setbacks, a relapse into his old spending habits that required a formal warning, periods of resentment when he chafed under the structure of his new role. But there were also breakthroughs. 6 months in, he landed a major distribution deal with a high-end restaurant group in Los Angeles, a genuine accomplishment that earned him recognition on his own merits rather than family favoritism. By the 2-year anniversary of the turnaround, Sunrise Valley had achieved what many in the industry considered impossible. We were not only solvent but showing a modest profit. Our 2023 Pinot Noir won a silver medal at a prestigious regional competition, validation that our quality had returned to the standards set by my grandfather. Ethan had met his sales targets for the first milestone in his ownership earnback plan, giving him a 5% stake in the business. It wasn't the control he'd once had, but it was something he'd genuinely earned, and I could see that it meant more to him because of that. My life had found a new rhythm as well. I'd been promoted to partner at Bradford Financial, partly based on the success of applying my professional skills to our family business. I split my time between San Francisco and Sonoma, maintaining my career while staying connected to the vineyard. I'd even started dating Jason, our vineyard consultant, whose contract had evolved into a permanent position as operations director. It was early days, but there was something promising in how we balanced each other, my financial focus complementing his agricultural expertise. My parents were finding their way into a retirement that looked different from what they'd envisioned but was secure in ways it wouldn't have been under the previous trajectory. They'd moved into the renovated guest house, giving me their master bedroom on the weekends I spent at the vineyard. Mom had started teaching wine appreciation classes at the local community college, sharing her considerable knowledge in a new context. Dad had taken up woodworking, creating beautiful custom boxes for our high-end wine gifts. On a warm evening in September 2024, exactly 2 years after the crisis call that had changed everything, we held a small celebration at the vineyard. The tasting room, now redesigned with a balanced approach that honored our heritage while looking forward, was closed to the public for a private event. Staff, family, and a few loyal customers who had stuck with us through the difficult transition gathered for a sunset toast. As I stood on the patio overlooking rows of healthy vines heavy with ripening grapes, I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in what we'd accomplished, lingering sadness for the years of disconnect, hope for what lay ahead. Ethan approached, offering me a glass of our newly released Chardonnay. "Not bad for a vineyard that was on death's door, huh?" "Not bad at all," I agreed, accepting the glass. "You've done good work this year, Ethan." He nodded, looking out over the vineyard rather than at me. "I was angry for a long time. Felt like you'd stolen something from me. But honestly, I was drowning. too proud to admit it, but drowning. It was the most direct acknowledgement he'd ever made of his failures and my intervention. I didn't push for more, some healing happened in small steps rather than grand gestures. We all made mistakes, I said. Mom and Dad, putting too much on you too soon. Me, staying away when I could have been more involved. You, trying to handle everything yourself. The Mitchell family specialty, stubborn pride, he said with a wry smile. Seems like we come by it honestly, I replied, clinking my glass against his. As the golden California sunset painted the vineyard in shades of amber and rose, I reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, arguments, and painful reckonings with the past. But standing here now, with Sunrise Valley not just surviving but beginning to thrive again, I knew we'd made the right choice. Sometimes saving a family business meant more than just balancing the books. Sometimes it meant rebalancing the family itself, challenging dysfunctional patterns that had been in place for decades. Sometimes the most loving thing you could do was say no to enabling, even when it felt like rejection in the moment. The vineyard would never be what it once was. Neither would our family. But perhaps what we were building now, on foundations of accountability, clear boundaries, and genuine respect, was stronger than what had come before. As I looked around at the gathered faces, my parents, Ethan, our dedicated staff, I realized that true healing rarely follows the path we expect. It comes in small moments of truth, in difficult boundaries maintained, in showing up consistently even when it's hard. It comes in the courage to disrupt dysfunctional patterns even when that disruption causes pain. Sunrise Valley had taught me that lesson twice now, first in letting go when I wasn't valued, and then in stepping back in on my own terms when the moment called for it. The vineyard, like the family that tended it, was resilient at its core. We'd weathered the storm and found our way to firmer ground, together but forever changed. As the evening deepened and stars appeared above the vineyard, I raised my glass for a final toast. To Sunrise Valley, past, present, and future. May we continue to grow together. The vineyard stretched out before us, rows of vines silhouetted against the twilight sky, a legacy preserved but also transformed. Like the best wines we produced, the story of our family business was complex, with notes of both sweetness and bitter truth, evolving over time into something worth savoring. Have you ever had to make a difficult financial decision involving family? How did you balance your own boundaries with family obligations? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might be struggling with similar family business dynamics. Thank you so much for listening to my story. May your own family journeys lead to healing, even when the path there isn't what you expected.